Welcome. In this video, we're going to talk about set-driven keys. Almost always, when you're doing lots of hand articulation, you're going to be establishing your set-driven keys. They are sliders that ultimately control repetitive motion for complex hierarchies. The way that we do that is very simply, we're going to introduce a custom attribute, and then we're going to apply those values keyed to those attributes. Now, we need to introduce a custom rigging handle to place that attribute on. So what we're going to do is create a curve, and I'm going to go ahead and hide my skin for the time being on my layer, and I'm going to go ahead and rotate that in the proper direction, making sure that that is at a strong 90-degree angle. I'm in a T-pose. This is another advantage of making sure that you're rigging in a T-pose. I'm going to snap that directly to the wrist and scale that down so it doesn't interfere. I also don't want that to look like a handle that my animator is going to use to manipulate my control rig. It's not, it's simply a carrier for my custom attribute. So with that handle created, I'm going to go ahead and remember, we've got to delete history and freeze our transforms, clear the data for anything, any object that we use in custom rigging. So edit drop down, delete by type history. We're going to go to modify, freeze transforms, and now you can see that there is no data on your transforms. Alright, we're going to introduce this to our current rig. I'm going to go ahead and select my parent object and parent that to that joint. Alright, and let's see, I'm going to use my IK to make sure that that is following along properly, and it is. Again, in case you missed that the first time around, I selected my handle, I shift selected my joint as the parent, I hit P on my keyboard to parent the custom handle to my joint, and then I tested the follow along by grabbing my IK end effector, which is controlling. You don't want to rotate this joint because it's being controlled now by your IK, and you can see that handle following along nicely. Alright, now that that is installed in our rig, we can introduce our custom attribute. I'm going to go ahead and select my attribute holder, and I'm going to go ahead to modify drop down, add attribute. Now this will go ahead and request that you name it, and with this handle I'm going to establish poses for my hierarchy, my hand hierarchy. So I'm going to use a control indicator. CNTL underscore is the way that I name my control objects, or I can add that to the end of my naming convention. And another way is hand underscore fist, which is going to be my first pose underscore control object. Whatever naming convention you choose, make sure it's consistent with your project. Minimum, I'm going to go ahead and put a -10 value in there, maximum 90, to make sure it's a range totaling 100%, and say OK. Now you can see that that custom attribute is installed with your other attributes here, and you can begin to to establish the relationship between the hierarchy here and this custom attribute. The way that we do that is through a window called SetDrivenKeys. I'm in the animation category of tools. I'm going to go ahead and go to Key, SetDrivenKey. You get a flyout. Simply click on Set ... option and it'll bring up the window for SetDrivenKeys. Now again, you're building relationships. You're not actually keyframing here. So with the custom attribute selected, the ring, I'm going to go ahead and load that as the driver, because it is this custom attribute that we're going to be changing the values to change the position of our hierarchy here. Alright, so with that selected, we're going to load that as the driver. And it's this custom attribute that we are now concentrating on. Now, what we're driving is the position of the hand. So it's this complex hierarchy here that we want to establish a position for. So to begin, remember, we're not using the joints at the end of the fingers in the animation, but every other joint here we are going to be using. Okay, so I'm going to select the joints that I'm going to be using for the fist pose. You select them one at a time, children first. Otherwise, if you select the parent first, everything will look like it's selected, but in fact it's not. So go ahead and select all of those, and these are the joints that are going to be driven. So I'm going to load them as driven. Now we still have to establish which of those attributes are going to be driven. So we're going to select all of the joints in the driven category, and we're going to be rotating. So I'm just going to simply select all of the rotation to give me full flexibility there. Alright, now that we have our set driven key relationships selected, we're going to begin to establish the keys for those relationships. At this particular node, you can see that the 0 is currently set, and so we're going to key that relationship. This is the 0 position for the pose, so we simply come over here now and set key. Okay. Now we're going to come back over to the custom attribute, and we're going to put in the value of 90. Remember, that value is one that we set for our custom attribute. This is the maximum. So now we're going to go ahead and select these joints and create our pose. I don't like to select them in the window. It seems to disrupt them slightly. So what I'm going to do, I'll start by rotating my fingers here. Now that I have all these fingers selected, I'm just going to rotate them together. It's going to my rotate option here and rotating them around. Because I have all of them selected, they're going to do their individual rotations, and that's why all the joints are rotating at the same time. Saves me a little time making a fist. The thumb rotates rather oddly, so I'm going to go ahead and rotate in one direction, spin that around, and now you know why I selected all the different rotation axes, so I have full control. I'm going to call that a fist. And so with the custom attribute selected, which is 90, my new position established, now I'm going to create that relationship by keying that relationship. Okay. All right. Now, to see how that works, I'm going to select on the custom attribute handle, middle mouse button held down in the viewport, and I can just go ahead and click and drag in the viewport to see that relationship between 0 and 90 being applied now. All right. we've got one more to do. -10, which is your anticipatory move, going slightly the opposite direction. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and usually start with a 0 to get those fingers in the proper place. Then I'm going to put in my -10 value. And with that value showing, I'm going to go ahead again and select each of these joints to create my position. All right, and I'm going the opposite direction with my fingers now. Remember, it's anticipation, and some people can do this. My fingers are not that flexible. I'm going to grab these and position those how I want them. Okay, splaying them out. Now that I have the position that I want, going back to my custom attribute handle, -10, just checking the value, checking my pose, and now I'm going to key the relationship between those attributes. Now I'm going to test it, selecting the hand fist control middle mouse wheel held down in my viewport, scrubbing left and right to be able to establish the position that I want. Now you're still not keying anything, you're laying no animation keys, but the way that you can do that, now that your relationships are established, you can choose in the time slider. Excuse me. Alright, and then you can find the position that you want. We're going to start at 0. You don't have to start at 0 though. And you're going to go ahead and you can right click right here to set a key. Okay, or you can set one right in the time slider here by clicking that. If auto key is on and you're actually establishing your position by dragging that, notice that on frame 5 of my time slider, it's going to automatically key that for you. Alright, scrubbing over, giving myself a different pose within that range, all the way out. Now I've established an animation for that finger, or the hand. Now, how easy and quick is that to have custom attributes for each of my common hand positions? I can simply go ahead and establish the position along this value set, the pose that I want. If I've got more than one, I can go ahead and apply values to all of those to mix the motions. That gives you a huge range of ability, and you're not rotating every single finger bone in every single keyframe to get there. You can imagine the time that that can save you. All right, now we can go ahead and close this window. I'm going to go ahead and reveal my mesh and see how well my mesh is deforming by running my animation. And I can see now I can use this particular range of motion to better weight my hand as well. All right, thank you for joining me for SetDrivenKeys. I'm going to go ahead and stop the video now and apply SetDrivenKeys to my other hand. And I'll be back with more custom rigging options in the next video of the series. Thank you for joining me.